Welcome to PowerCon, guys. PowerCon 2018. Kicking things off, it's the very first panel of the show, and I think it's a very appropriate one for this year because 2018 marks a decade of Masters of the Universe classics, which is, yeah, it's insane. It's pretty amazing. You know, when those first figures came out 10 years ago, I don't think I could have imagined that we would have got the selection of characters, the vehicles, the crazy creatures. Nonetheless, still here 10 years later talking about these toys. It's really, really incredible. At this point, the classics line has outlived the vintage line. We've got more figures than we ever got. It's just an amazing feat. So today we are here with several of the folks who have been involved in the line, all the way down to the sculpting, the packaging, everything about Masters of the Universe Classics. And we're going to go ahead and talk to them today, hear about what it was like to work on these, what it's like to still work on them today. And towards the end of the panel, we'll open it up for about 15, 10 minutes worth of questions from you guys if you've got some questions. So let's go ahead and start by going down the line. If you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourselves down the line and saying what you've done for Masters of the Universe Classics.
Hey, I'm Cornboy for Horsemen Toy Design. I just get the coffee for these guys.
Jim Preziosi for Horsemen. Just basically, we've been involved with the classics since the beginning. Very interesting the way it started, and just happy to be part of it.
I'm Eric, also from Four Horsemen, and we do all the sculpting and painting, things like that for the line, and basically have just been having a blast working on this stuff for the last decade.
I'm Katherine Benecke from Mattel. Worked on Motu Classics packaging from Filmation to the Giants.
Ruben Martinez. I used to manage the business a while ago. Great pleasure working with the Four Horsemen. Amazing stuff. I also had the pleasure of working briefly on the 2000X line, so it's been a lot of fun working on Motu.
Brandon Sopinsky, currently lead design for Masters of the Universe at Mattel, and then I worked on the last couple of years of the Motu Classics and everything currently in progress now.
Awesome. Let's hear for these guys. So to get the conversation rolling, let's jump back 10 years, maybe even a little bit longer, because when the Classics line first started, I remember the very first thing that happened to get everybody excited was, I believe it was at a San Diego Comic-Con, a mysterious He-Man figure showed up in the case, which is what got everybody kind of talking, trying to figure out what was going on. The 2000X line had come to an end a few years prior, which is when the Four Horsemen got involved in all of this. So for anybody who can answer or wants to jump in, what was the process that brought you guys to that point? Putting that new He-Man figure in the case that was a little bit more vintage inspired rather than 2000X, that kind of got the ball rolling. How did that come about?
Well, we had, as you said, the 2000X series had kind of come to an end, and you know, we didn't want to see Masters of the Universe in. It had been a property that, you know, we grew up with, that we were just tickled pink to have been able to work on when we were doing the 2000X stuff, and we were trying to find a new way to approach Mattel with this and come up with a new design aesthetic for these that maybe would catch on, that somebody would be interested in. And so we took the kind of the classic old school 80s look of Masters of the Universe and said, what if we took this and we updated it to today's standards, and we changed the proportions slightly but kept it nice and bulky and heavy duty, and we added in new articulation that kind of fits today's standards, and presented that to Mattel. And so we did. We put a prototype together, and Eric came up with this beautiful He-Man piece. It changed from the initial prototype slightly to the final product that eventually came out, but we took that to Comic-Con with us. We had a breakfast meeting with a few of the guys at Mattel. We were all sitting around the table talking about it, and the response to it was a little bit lukewarm at first. I mean, we just had a He-Man figure, and it was, like I said, based on the original kind of bulky look, but updated. And it was kind of lukewarm, and everybody's like, yeah, it's cool, but I don't know. I think they were a little standoffish about Masters of the Universe, but there was one guy there, Dave Voss, who said, let's go ahead and take this thing and put it in the shelf out there at Comic-Con, along with all the rest of the stuff. And you know, the show had been running for a day or two already, and there was already stuff in the shelves, but they took it and they just stuck it in the shelf in there, and they just wanted to see what fan response would be, and see if there would be a positive response. Well, I think, as you guys know, fandom went nuts over it, and it just took off from there.
That's amazing.
I'd like to say I wasn't in that breakfast meeting, and I was not lukewarm about it. It was amazing.
So it was it the very next year, I think? It was when the King Grayskull figure ended up being the San Diego exclusive?
Yeah, that was, but we had just come off of doing the statues for NECA.
That's right, yeah.
So like in between when we had the 2000X, that kind of faded out. Then we picked up that for probably another year. And I think the problem was they were concerned of confusion of like what, you know, if they developed this other type of He-Man figure, Masters of the Universe figure, the fans would be confused of what he's supposed to look like, because we had just come off of the other stuff. And then they always had something in the future that was may or may not have happened, so they were a little like cautious about how they were going to handle it.
Gotcha, okay.
Right.
So the very first official figure then became the King Grayskull figure at San Diego Comic-Con. What was the decision to make him the first character in the release? Was it just a way to bridge the gap between 2000X and this new line you were doing, or do you remember?
You know, I don't remember at all. I don't know what drove the choice of King Grayskull being the first figure, but I do know that you're absolutely right. There was a lot of residual, like, we just had a mass line go away at retail. How ready are people for another version of He-Man? But I do want to say that just the fact that we were still testing it out at Comic-Con, and I know that it was, Comic-Con becomes like a testing ground for some of the stuff that we do, but the response really drove the demand for us to do something and really come up with a unique way of selling the entire line to people. We knew that collectors were still very passionate about it, because King Grayskull, I mean, come on, people bought King Grayskull, and if you didn't know who King Grayskull was, you weren't going to buy it. But at Comic-Con, it really highlighted the figure. Mm-hmm. So then that drove us to say, hey, there's still an appetite, and it's really, really collector based. Maybe the younger kids of America and the world weren't ready for it, but the adults and the people that grew up with it were still passionate about it. So I don't quite remember what drove the King Grayskull figure, but I do remember us saying, wow, we need to do something more with this.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what the sales of King Grayskull is, what basically said, let's do this. Green light, let's go.
I think it was a very, very big factor in it, and I think a lot of passion from these gentlemen and people internally at Mattel really made it something and turned it into something and continues to keep it going.
Well, one thing that kind of became a little bit revolutionary at that convention was we were actually on a panel, and people were doing the Q&A. It was a panel with us in Mattel, and we were doing a Q&A, and somebody came up and said, well, what about a subscription service? And we were thinking, why not? And the guys at Mattel thought it was a great idea. You know, let's try to do a subscription service for these, and you sign up for it and buy them online instead of having to put them in retail. And they took that ball and ran with it, and it did pretty well for them.
Yeah.
We're, what, 200 and some odd figures into that line now?
Yeah, I mean,
250 maybe?
I mean, Motu started our collector business, which branched off into other, you know, licensed partners that we worked with, like DC and Ghostbusters. But Motu was always the flagship, you know, license for us that drove all of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was pretty revolutionary at the time, because there weren't really direct-to-consumer sales.
People had dabbled,
companies.
but nothing really successful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was.
It's pretty incredible that happened.
The climate around Mattel at the time was part of what had changed so much since the days of the 2002 launch. when we started with that, there were some people in there that were more, still some people around from even the original Masters of the Universe line. And by the time the classics rolled around, a lot of the people within Mattel that were decision makers were people that were more our age, that grew up with Masters of the Universe.
Yeah.
So you had this perfect storm of creators and marketers and people company-wide that were willing to take a risk on something like this just because they loved the product as much as they did.
That's awesome. And actually that actually brings Brandon to mind for me, because I know that's exactly how you are, right? I mean, you're just a big fan of this property and you want to see it continue and be successful.
Yeah, I mean, you know, fortunately I came on to the brand kind of at the end of Matty Collector, which was unfortunate that, you know, the site itself had to go down, which a lot of it went, you know, with it. But there was a huge amount of support for everything that we were starting. So we've been trying to find ways just from the passion of the brand to keep it going and keep it alive, and work with the guys from Super 7 to make sure that like this brand is not going anywhere. There is a very bright future for this brand, for sure.
Awesome.
And you know, trying to launch new stuff on there and trying to find ways to bring more of that amazing, passionate collector product into Mattel. I'd say it's kind of that perfect storm again of people that are in charge and people that are, you know, leading creative direction and marketing and making those decisions to make this kind of stuff easier to get out of Mattel and new brands to come in and take more risks. So hopefully very soon we can start kind of making some bigger announcements too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
It's very
Make you guys
cool.
happy.
10 years later, this is still going. I love it. That's amazing. So Katherine, specifically you've worked on packaging, right, for Masters of the Universe Classics?
Yes.
What have you worked on specifically that you can kind of tell us about and your process for that?
So when I came into the Motu business, the Medi Collector line was already up and running in a pretty good gear. So my role was, when I was on the Motu Classics line, was making sure that I kind of kept on legacy of the already established branding with the green gray skull line look going. And one of the challenges was to trying to bring authenticity of the collector line based the shield art. So I had a kind of fun digging up archives,
Cool.
trying to like dig up those like old the original art, and then like actually be able to scan them and then put it onto the package.
Oh,
so
for
that,
like the bios on the
Yes.
back where you have the shield art.
right,
Okay.
and then working with the copywriter to make it a little more updated and then bring to life. The other packaging line down the line was worked on was the Motu Minis, and also the Filmation, the line look, as well as the Giants 12-inch lines.
Oh, cool. So the Filmation ones with the gray skull boxes, the window boxes.
Yeah, so one of the inspiration was the Filmation, the intro, where the Castle Grayskull with a He-Man and so I'm the power, and then like the main characters comes out, in front of the Grayskull. So that was sort of idea that the box kind of, as you slide open, you actually reveal each character inside of Grayskull. So that was sort of inspiration to how to create that package.
I really enjoyed the Filmation packaging. I thought I liked the colors and how colorful it was in the window box. But also at that point, it felt like kind of a nice little change of pace because we had seen those green bricks for so long and so many years. So the next question is that was there ever any discussion to change up the packaging design at all on the classics, or did you guys just say it needed to be exactly the same all the way through for like the branding purpose?
I think there was some kind of debate between we don't want to turn off the royal collectors,
like the mint on card collectors that wanted everything to look the same,
right? So that and I know like my husband is a hardcore collector that yeah, right. And so then like he always buy at least two, one in the package and one out of package.
Nice.
I'm sure
Nice.
Everyone can sort of relate to. And some things that it is in packages, he really loved creating the wall of the same look. So It was kind of like a debate whenever we try to update the look of the branding. It sometimes can be tricky.
Yeah.
So we try to come up with a new segment, like either minis or the Filmation or Giant, to refresh the line of the product as well as the brand. We kind of approach it that way instead of trying to upset the royal collector.
Gotcha.
It actually worked on the one package, I think, that we changed it, which was the anti-Eternia.
Oh, yes, the black and red box.
I wanted to change all the packaging all the time.
Yeah.
I think at one point we were looking at doing like red, like more classic.
Like the vintage.
Yeah, and it's strange how much you really just focus on one thing and it just becomes this huge debate, and it's like, are we doing the right thing? Are we not doing the right thing? And
Yeah.
it's sometimes like, okay, well, let's just keep true to what we've been doing. You know, I don't think it hurt the product at all for not changing it. If its consistency is good for some people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like Katherine said, I think we changed it where we needed to make where it made sense.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. So the Classics line, what was so exciting about this was it was sort of meant to be like an all-encompassing toy line, meaning for the first time ever we could have one line that included the vintage He-Man stuff, the She-Ra stuff, the New Adventure stuff. So when this first started, was that always kind of the direction? Was there any sort of debates on character selection and who should be included in the line?
Well, that was certainly the hope, but I think early on, I don't think we had the ability to use the She-Ra characters at that point, did we?
I don't.
Early on we did, and
No,
I think it was later on when that came in, and possibly even the New Adventures
Like
too.
Yeah, the Filmation
Yeah.
stuff too. I mean, a lot of it, I think what we wanted to do was focus on the classic stuff and get as many of those as we could
Right.
done. And then when we were able to start peppering in some of the other characters from the universe. So it was kind of like, we want to focus on the ones that everybody wanted, like the classics.
Yep.
And then start just getting to the other characters and other lines.
Right. Yeah, well, when we started to do a couple of the New Adventures characters, I myself was a little bit against it because I was never really a fan of the New Adventures kind of guys. I was in the classic characters. But once we did the New Adventures and put them in that Motu classic style, it just worked,
It
and they
made
became
sense,
beautiful action figures, and they seemed to mesh in really well with the rest of the line. So it ended up, some of those New Adventures characters are actually some of my favorites now. And I think that if we ever get the chance to do some more of the movie characters like He-Man and Skeletor themselves in Motu classic style, I think they'd be beautiful figures.
Trying to make that one happen.
Yeah.
Are you?
that's-
Okay, I was about
That's
to
like
jump
the holy
in.
grail of, like, what's left.
I was going to say, I feel like that's all that's left at this point. Where's our Langella Skeletor and our
A
Langella?
two-pack of those two would be phenomenal.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah.
Yeah?
There you go.
I guess we do it then, huh?
So you might have already answered this with what you were talking about, but it was definitely a progression. As you guys were going, you were able to pepper in more things. It seemed like there was some real hesitation in the beginning, aside from King Grayskull, to include 2000X elements. And there were a lot of characters, I remember in the beginning, like Clawful and Whiplash, where people wanted the more 2000X inspired stuff. So was that because you were trying to distance yourselves from the failed 2000X line, or like because it just recently ended, or what was the reasoning for holding off on in the beginning, and then at the end, all of a sudden, we got all that stuff?
I think it was just, we kind of took a page from classic toy where we wanted to do variants of characters or like reinterpretation of characters.
Mm-hmm.
So doing a more inspired by version of some of the 2000X stuff, we knew that those were the characters that people loved or liked the redesigns for. So it was like, okay, why not do them? So it was a more updated version of a classic style, so it just made sense, and they looked great.
Right. So for the Horsemen, the 2000X stuff was stuff that you guys basically recreated and redesigned yourself. What was it like switching back towards more this vintage style? Was that something, was it difficult? Was it something that you didn't really want to do, or was it?
No, it was very, very natural
Yeah.
at that point, because we felt like, with 2002, by the time we finished the action figure line and then went through the mini statue line with NECA, we'd covered so many of the characters by that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, it doesn't sound right, but the natural progression was actually to go backwards at that point. Because the 2002 line was, for a lot of fans, there was controversy, with every new character reveal and whether or not shoulder pads were too big or swords were too mechanical or whatever it might be. And then so after going through all that and the line eventually not doing as well as it was expected, to go back to that comfort zone of those original characters, it just it felt very, very natural, and it was for us a lot of fun to go back into it because we got to reassess what we grew up with and look at those original figures and study card back art and gain an entire new appreciation for what we loved in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're looking at these characters to make a new figure based off of it, do you draw your inspiration from various sources? Because sometimes they're very much like a new version of a vintage toy, but then there's other times, like I know Merman specifically, you guys made sure to do that card back head that I know you always wanted to have, right? That
been
card back
dying
head.
to do that version
Yeah.
since we started the line.
I mean, because the challenge was we're going back to the past and redesigning these characters that people know so well. And again, going back to the 2002 line, every new reveal there was something for people to talk about, and there was surprise, an element of surprise involved with it. And so by pulling from those various resources on classics, it was partially a way of introducing elements into the line so people didn't know exactly what to expect every time. Mm-hmm. And of course, when we could do it in a way where we could put two heads in the package or an alternate version of an accessory, that was our favorite way to do it, so that people, when they got the figure, they had the choice to either push it a little 2002 or a little mini comic or a little vintage toy inspired. But it was a way to keep things interesting, and also, like in the case of that Merman, just kind of check one off the wish list.
Yeah, awesome. So one of the big key things in this line was kind of like the reuse of parts, which was big in the vintage line too. It helped actually get a lot of these characters out there because you can use the same body type and stuff for a lot of these guys. And you always found creative ways sometimes to make these characters look different by using the same body. Like Merman's a great example again with the collar piece on the neck that you would add and stuff like that. But as the line progressed, I mean, we're talking about a line that's been around for 10 years, and usually in toy lines, you see a lot of changes over the time where like new articulation is added or improved and such. And even with the release of the Filmation stuff, you added the ankle rocks, and you added the hand where He-Man could actually do the I have the power pose. So how does that play into like the classic stuff? Because they pretty much stay exactly the same all the way through. Is there ever opportunities or times where you guys wish you could add more articulation, or is there any improvements that you would like to see made?
Every once in a while.
Like
you mentioned the hand with He-Man. I mean, that was something we wanted to get into the line all along, but I think very much with what Katherine was talking about with the packaging, there was a certain consistency of the line that needed to be maintained, because if people are investing in this line from the beginning, it's somewhat, it's a fine line. It's either you're upgrading these figures or it's a betrayal of what people have invested in from the beginning. So doing little things like those ankle pivots or the hand, adding ball joints to the hands or things like that, it's not so, sorry.
Speaking to the mic.
Okay. Okay. So with that, we wanted to make sure that we're being consistent enough that it didn't feel like it was a different line by the time, 10 years later, that you're collecting different figures than you were, 10 years ago when you started the line.
Right. Okay, very cool. So along the line, we got to a point where some brand new characters were introduced into the line, which was part of the whole the create a character type of thing, where they ran the contest, which is what gave us Castle Grayskull Man, and several designers got to kind of create their own figures, and you guys, the Horsemen, got to make your very own character in the line, which is pretty awesome that you guys got to put your own mark on it. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like designing Drago-Man, how you came up with it, whose idea it was, anything you want to tell us about him?
We had actually drawn up a bunch of possible Masters of the Universe classics of our own that we wanted to do a while back, and then when we were approached with possibly doing a character design, we said, let's do something cool. Eric came up with the whole Drago-Man thing, and it just turned out phenomenal.
It was a lot of pressure, and it took a lot longer than, I mean, in the end, it seems like a no-brainer of a character, but it was like a big circle to get to that point, because with Masters, it's very easy to get caught up in the whole name aspect, the clever, clawful, buzz-off, silly name thing. And then eventually the turning point was that looking at the first wave of figures, everything was a simpler name. It was just Merman, Beast Man. It wasn't as clever with the name aspect of it. And so once we hit that point, then it was just a matter of finding a strong theme that hadn't really been done in the line. And Dragon Man, we couldn't use Dragon Man, so it became Drago-Man.
Cool. Awesome. I think I speak for many of us when we say that it's an incredible figure, and I think it's a perfect addition to the line. I don't know about you guys, but I love Drago-Man. All right, I'm going to put you guys on the spot now. Least favorite figures in the Classics line?
Drago-Man.
Drago-Man. Do you guys have any least favorites? Ones that you just don't like the way they turned out, or that weren't fun to work on? And this is for everybody.
One purple and yellow Deadpool knockoff figure. I don't remember the name of it. Hate that figure.
I have to echo that sentiment. I just feel that visually it doesn't fit the line.
No.
It just did not fit the line.
I think everybody was waiting for that.
There you
go. Oh boy. All right. Any others? Or just him?
Molar.
Molar. Okay. All right. I think we're seeing a trend here.
I'd say Gwildor.
Gwildor?
Yeah. I think it turned out okay, but working on it was a nightmare.
Really?
That was kind of my first dip into this weird world of what movie figures we could do and what we couldn't do. And when it showed up, it was in full-on movie-accurate colors, and Scott was kind of losing it because it came with accessories that were straight from the movie. It had the keyboard and the bucket of ribs, and I was under the impression that he's we can't do that. It has to be toy inspired. So it was this insane chase of trying to figure out how to take the amazing sculpt that these guys had done and kind of give it that toy look, where the colors were a little bit more like the vintage toy. We found some accessories that we could kit bash that were okay, this is kind of like what he came with. And it was just a nightmare of emails, going back and forth with China, schedules that were just late.
Oh, man.
So it was just a lot of uphill craziness that I think later found out we were doing for nothing. We could have just probably put it out the way it looked.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So it was a lot of stuff that we were being told that necessarily wasn't, no one really followed through with, or would have been yeah, you can't do it that color, or I think we probably could have been.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he looked great. He just was a nightmare to work on.
There's, honestly, there's a lot of those that come to mind, but it's never the figure. It's just the process. It's once we get amazing sculpts from these gentlemen, it's just making sure that everything matches what the vision is, and from a production standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from a timing standpoint. I mean, it's never the visuals of the figures, except for a certain figure that looks like Deadpool. But it's more the development process. There's memorable figures that I'm oh my God, that was a pain in the butt too.
I mean, I think one that stands out more than that is the Filmation He-Man off the bat. Like the ankle issue with that thing
Oh,
was
yeah.
a nightmare. And it wasn't like, here's this amazing figure and we got this amazing figure back. It was like, hey, we want to fix the ankles, we want to update it. And I remember it was like 2 weeks of going back and forth saying, here's what we need. And it was just like complete lack of like understanding the easiest drawings. And then they'd send back a model that was just completely nowhere near it. And it was just disgustingly ugly and did not work. And then it was like, oh, guess what? We're behind schedule. We have to move forward. And we're like, you come to this point where you can only do so much to get it right, that you have to kind of like let it go and then try to fix it down the line with the rest of the figures that are left. But the problem was something with that, it seems so small to everybody else, but like, no, this is going to affect every figure in the line. If we use this common tool part, we need to get it right, but it backdates everything if we kind of push that out. So these little tiny details that maybe the rest of the company sees, like, what are you stressing about? Why are you fighting for it? Has this ripple effect, right, into the line. And so this line in particular, with all the figures, you know, you try to make sure that all the details are there that these guys have put into it, and all the production issues are taken out of it, and you all the quality control that goes into it. You know, you go back and forth with some of the plants of like, here's how you paint an eye. Here's the step of, you know, how a highlight shouldn't be over their eyeliner, because your eyeliner on your real eye doesn't have a white dot over it. Or like, you know, try to simplify it so that it's a super simple process. And no matter how much you think you have it locked in the books, you still get stuff back that you're just like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, you have to kind of just give up at a certain point and let it just go. So there's always those scenarios where you're just like, you have to kind of like step away and just hope it's not a disaster, or it's like, okay, it's ugly, but it poses really well, right? You're like, and then, you know, you try to win that battle, and then pictures come out of like what the photography team took, and it's like highlights it in the worst way possible, and you're like, guys, what are you doing? You know, so you have to just kind of let it go sometimes, and just, it's still a great figure, and the rest of the line was great. So that was one thing I would love to try to fix.
Yeah. Well, no, this is actually very interesting, because I don't think a lot of people realize like how many different steps there are to getting these produced, and how many people touch it, and how many different departments and people you have to talk to make these things happen. Because I think a lot of times it's very easy as fans and collectors to just look at the paint master and look at the final figure and say, why doesn't it look exactly like that?
Yeah, I mean, the process of when these guys turn over an amazing figure, it's beautiful, it's a work of art, it's a hand-painted model, and then we'll get that painted figure that we usually show off, you know, at the convention or online, and then we get like a tooling model, right? So we get the parts, the actual physical casts. Nowadays we get more 3D file stuff, but then we send that over, and we usually get like a tooling model back. So China will take, our factories, you know, overseas will take, here's all the new parts, here's all the old parts, here's your build, right? So it's kind of like the mixture of what's new and what's old, and you double check it, make sure everything looks good and fits, or you make notes, you send that out, and then you're, okay, like, we're all holding hands here, this is what we're getting. And then you get a first shot, which is usually just the plastic shot out of the molds, and you're like, there's a lot of problems here, but you have a lot of time to tweak and fix. And then you get another shot, which is like, okay, colors are better, kind of the real color, spacing, articulation should be better, and you have these milestones you hit, but you get to a point on a mass line, right, where you're looking at hundreds of thousands of units. Like, a PP sample is kind of like your last, all right, everything should be perfect. This is what we're producing. And maybe there's like 2,000 units that might make it out that maybe have a little bit of change. In 100,000 units, that's okay. But when you're looking at a line that's 6,500 units to 9,000 units, that's a problem, right? But at that point in the schedule, like, we'll get it, we'll have notes that we would love to make, and we just can't. So like, that's where you see sometimes like things get out there, you're like, there's 2,000s with these weird wonky eyes, or like, you know, this change we could make as a running change. But when you're in a subscription, you don't have the ability to choose, right? So you can't say, I want that one or that one. It's like, you only get what you have been given through the mail. So there's things you can't get away with. You know, you don't want that to happen.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, basically, it's just like the photocopy analogy. A copy of a copy of a copy just gets worse and worse and worse. What we try to do is, when we get the Horseman sculpt, we want everything to look as good as this. And our job is to make sure at every step of the way, we go back to this and say, it has to look like this. And to Brandon's point, excuse me, it's just a process where you get different people working on product at different stages in development in our overseas plant. So the person that was working at this stage isn't carrying forward some of his information to the next person. So it's like you have to talk to this person from scratch and explain everything over and over and over again. So just a challenge from getting it from the beautiful sculpt, beautifully articulated figure to a product that we're all happy with that's going to make it on shelf. We're just babysitting and making sure that it is as accurate a portrayal of the initial concept as we can get in production, that we're all happy with, that goes on the shelf that makes you guys hopefully happy. But it's crazy. I mean, it's our job, and I may be making you sound like it's a horrible thing. It's not, but it's honestly very challenging, and it's always like mental gymnastics. I'm trying to find a way to get the things you need done with the people that you're communicating with. So it's challenging, but it's the end product hopefully is worth the wait or worth the challenge.
Sounds like we have the better of the jobs.
You could argue that, sure.
That, we got the easy job.
Well, maybe this kind of plays into this, and you guys can speak on the inclusion of action features in some of these toys, because across the board, this was pretty much deemed like a no action features line because it's meant to be like a collectible, posable figure. But for some characters in the world of He-Man, the action features make sense, and they almost should be included. And I think the best example that comes to my mind right now is Rio Blast. Should have had the opening cavity with the gun inside. And you guys opted to do the armor with the fold-down piece, and then shortly after that, Hurricane Hordak came out, Buzzsaw Hordak came out, and he actually has the opening chest cavity. So was that something where you kind of decided maybe we should have did this with Rio, so let's do it with Buzzsaw?
I think sometimes, yes, that's absolutely the case, but a lot of times it's money driven too. Like I would imagine that Rio Blast was probably a more expensive figure from the amount of parts and everything that went into him than the Hordak figure was, because it was a lot of it was existing. Where Rio Blast, there was a lot of newer parts. So a lot of times we have to balance. All right, what can we get for the money we're given? We're given X amount of dollars to play with for each one of these figures, and how much we can get into it is the challenge. How much can we get as much of the concept that these guys have given us into a product that we can afford? So that might have been the case. I can't remember exactly what the situation was there, but I do remember Rio Blast being a very involved figure in a lot of newer parts. So
Gotcha.
it has to do with the amount of tooling we have to put into this, how many new parts we had to do with this. So that would have probably been a contributing factor to it from my memory.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, too, that version of Hordak, one of the issues was that the concern was that he was so similar to the existing Hordak that it was not a very compelling figure to buy again. And so I think since he was, like Ruben said, minimally tooled figure at that point, I think that was part of the decision.
They just said go for it. Let's go ahead and do the
to do something
Gotcha.
to make it a little bit more of a unique figure at that point.
Yeah, I think it's as easy as it sounds. I think just putting a spring in some of these figures would have meant we would have to have redesigned the torso and resculpted a torso for like Fisto or Jitsu and have that spring-loaded feature. And then that would have been an additional cost that would took us over being able to produce that figure. So a lot of times it was really driven off of the fact that we're trying to do classic figures that look great with contemporary articulation designed by these amazing artisans here. But the features had to be kind of a secondary thing. And since so many of the figures didn't have those really big demonstrable features, we felt it was a good trade-off to get the paint and the articulation, which wasn't really present in the original product in the 80s. So it's a trade-off, and it's a balancing act.
Well, I've never been a huge fan of action features in action figures anyway, unless it's something that doesn't destroy the aesthetic look of the figure and it doesn't hinder the articulation in any way. Then I'm okay with it. But if it's something that, like if you have an action feature in a figure and then, his arm can only do this and then you can't like pose him in any other way, I don't really care for that. So I was fine with the Masters of the Universe Classics not having action features for the most part.
So what I'm hearing is that there's no way I'm going to get a mosquito with real liquid blood in his chest? Or...
We could probably do that and not mess up the aesthetic of the figure. But that ship may have sailed, Dan.
Yeah. So do you guys, when you're sculpting on the sculpting end, do you ever decide from that standpoint that there could be an action feature or work that in when you're thinking about some of these guys? Or another thing, some of these guys, like you add things that were on the vintage figure that were for an action feature, like the dial on Hurricane Hordek's back. You just kind of worked it in with the sculpt. Was that kind of like a case-by-case basis, deciding if that's something that should be there or if it was too toy to add to the new figure?
I think so. I think although sometimes there were rules that were in place with the line, at least from our standpoint, we tried not to have too many hard rules, and so that we could keep things loose and go on a figure-by-figure basis. I mean, things like just putting that dial on, it was just a fun nod to the vintage, and it was on the back of the figure, so didn't really, from the front it still looked like a classics figure and didn't intrude on the aesthetics at all. But on a figure like Manny Faces, that feature, you couldn't do a figure like that without having the different faces, or it would have been a pretty lame figure otherwise.
Interchangeable
same
heads.
with Benecke too. Like Benecke, the Benecke that we didn't have the twisty torso feature, but it came with extra neck pieces where you could pop it out and pop the head on, so you do have a Benecke. That's an action feature that, just because of who the character is, it has to be there in some way. Maybe not the same way the original one was done, but it has to be in there.
Cool. All right, we're getting close to opening it up to some questions from you guys, but I wanted to ask, and this might be putting you on the spot too, favorite figure that you guys worked on in the line? Do you have a favorite that really stands out, something that you loved working on, regardless of what you did for it?
Oh, well, I got to be first? Just because I'm...
That's right. They're all waiting for you.
Let's move on. I have to think about that, because I actually have a lot of favorites.
I'm going to pass.
You mentioned the Merman earlier.
Yeah.
That's to me, that was not only a highlight, but that's kind of when the line hit its stride with what the possibilities could be moving forward.
Roboto, I guess, would be a good one, because that, it has the action feature, the stuff inside his body. So that was kind of cool to work on.
I know what my favorite figure is. It's Strongor from
Yeah?
the Filmation. I have to say that's probably one of my favorite figures in the line because it's just so odd, but it was in the show. Just visually, it looked great. And I remember when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah,
so
he was...
that's one of my favorites.
He was one of those characters that I think people wanted for a long time because he was in the show and we didn't have him as a kid.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
And I think finally it was like, oh, years later, I get one, but it looked amazing. It's probably one of my favorites.
Cool.
I would say working on like Anti-Eternity He-Man or any of the Chase figures were always fun because it's a weird process as a designer working on this brand compared to other toy brands where you're actually heavily involved in the full-on design. So we take so much of what these guys create in the amazing sculpts and characters. It's like when it comes to us, it's like it's beautiful and like we don't have to really do too much design work. It's more of like you said, like the production and making sure it looks as good.
Yeah.
So when we have the opportunity to actually do some designing, actually have some fun with characters that, we're not throwing in a new character that's taking out, a spot for something that these guys want. Anti-Eternity He-Man was kind of fun because the character existed, but there was never any official like visualization of that character, right? So trying to find a way to like bring that to life was fun, and then playing with the packaging.
Yeah.
It's less stress. Also, if it's like we can have some fun with it. There's a little more leeway. It's a little bit more freedom to kind of like make it look cool and not be beholden to this like set in stone design. So
Right.
those are always fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I guess my favorite will be either Evil Seed or Stinkor. There's a three actually, so like Stinkor or Evil Seed, because I had to really have much fun recreating the art for the Filmation, Evil Seed character art for that. And also the Faker. I think it's a Faker is a pretty cool one.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. Excellent. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and open up the floor now for questions. Anything that you guys want to ask. There's a microphone right here in the center, so if I can get you guys to line up, and you are free to ask whatever you want to ask for any of our panelists up here.
Speaking about Stinkor and the scented figures, just a question about, in terms of applying the scent to the plastic and things like that. I noticed when Mossman first came out, it was extremely strong. I mean, still to this day, my closet smells like pine, right?
You're welcome.
And then Stinkor came out, and it had the patchouli scent, but it was very subtle. It's there, you can smell it, but it definitely doesn't like make my whole room smell like, the patchouli. And then, I'm tired this morning. Perfuma, thank you. Perfuma came out, again, boom, power, crazy, the rose smell, it's everywhere. Was there, a thing where you guys were like, whoa, we have to back off, and then decided to put it back in, or was there what was the sign factor?
So your question is, why didn't Stinkor stink as much as he could have?
Right, yeah. or the other one's less,
Imagine how many complaints we would have got if my Stinkor smells so bad I cannot even walk into my house.
So I don't know if you guys got that little air freshener a couple years ago at Comic-Con. It was a
Oh,
Stinkor.
yeah.
If you actually opened it, it's disgusting. So we had a meeting where we all had these little jars of different terrible smells, and you couldn't really smell them because they were so putrid. You had to kind of do that, and I still have one. I'm never gonna open it because it's horrible.
Yeah, I would say from a production standpoint, I think it was just this is the low end of what is acceptable for odor, and what would get by our CP group. Because even though this is collector product, I think we still have to have our consumer products people look at it and say, hey, it's a bit strong. Okay, and patchouli, I mean, honestly, that stuff's it's very strong.
So it was an intentional choice, is what I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah, I from my recollection, I would say yes, because I mean, Mossman, he smells good.
Yeah.
And Perfuma smells good. I don't want stinky stuff in my closet.
Cool.
Are you ever gonna make packs where you're able to make your own figures, or an app that you're able to make your own game that's He-Man?
We definitely are now. That's something we've talked about many, many times, is not just with Masters of the Universe Classics, but over the years in various toy lines, creating almost like customizable action figure sets. I don't know, that'd be kind of a cool thing to do. Have a base body that you go off of.
Yeah, I mean, you're thinking the right way. I mean, I've built many comp app games of how do we make your own master, right? I think that's something that is great for the line, and just the way the line is designed, I would love to do that. So it's not out of the question.
Yeah,
is that something you would want? Yeah.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So, can you tell us a little bit more about the history of Standor? Your feelings about Standor, regarding to the sculpt
The
and
coolest
design?
thing about that was I got to shake hands with Stan Lee. That was awesome.
So I will tell you I worked on Standor. I actually designed Standor. So if you want to boo me, that's fine. But I did it I actually worked with Stan many, many years ago at Stanley Media. And at the time, when I believe Mattel and Power Entertainment were kind of developing a relationship. And it was kind of one of those publicity type items, like, oh my God, let's pair Stan Lee with Motu. And I was like, okay, all right, sure. But I would say that I've never seen Stan look so ripped. He looked pretty amazing for a 90-some-year-old man. He looked pretty good. But I mean, the thought process behind the character was like he's a omnipotent creator. He's celestial, so that's why he had the star pattern in his in his armor. So it was more kind of like just paying homage to the man and kind of trying to build a small place in the Motu universe for him. and get a little publicity out of it, I'm sure, which was the intent.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, I will say, when he showed up at that panel at Comic-Con and then read the bio, I was sold.
Yeah.
That's all I needed.
Cool.
It was cool. Yeah.
I missed you guys in San Diego. Weren't you running late for your panel that day? No. Help me try to understand the business. So I guess Master Universe can be spread across different companies, the properties, because I'm sure you guys seen the Sideshow collectible statues that they're doing right now. They're really neat looking. What's the chance of you guys making those into figures, or is that strictly Sideshow, that image, that version of He-Man?
I guess I could take that. So, yeah, I mean, we still hold, Masters of the Universe is our property, so we do license out to a lot of different companies, and they get to do their version, their take. The Sideshow stuff is amazing looking, and I think that's them kind of creating their own take on that. If we were to ever want to do those as like a 6-inch, like a classic
I'd rather
style
have a figure
figure.
than a statue, but
I think it would just be, do we want to maybe partner with them on it or work with them? Are they open to it? It's definitely not out of the question. It would just be making sure that everybody from both companies is kind of on board with that. If that was something that also, the fans would want to see.
Or maybe do our own high-end Masters of the Universe. We actually presented a He-Man, it was like a 9-inch one a few years ago that was like,
oh, really?
I'm sorry, I got to say this. It is amazing the amount of stuff that these guys come up with that I wish we could share with you, that I'm like, God, this would be amazing. Oh, this would be amazing. And this would be amazing. But there's only so much room, and there's only so much time in the day, and there's only so much, I think, there's just only so many things we can do. So I've seen your 9-inch version was amazing of He-Man. It's one of my favorites. Cool, but that's along the line. That's very much what they were pitching, is what Sideshow's kind of doing, a very modern, stylized version of the characters. And it's just about timing. I think right now what's happening is we're still focusing on the classic stuff.
Okay.
And if there's an opportunity, then there's an opportunity, and we'll explore it.
No, he kind of answered my question. I was just kind of learning. So if you did do it, you'd have to collaborate with Sideshow, right? Like, do you have to get permission from them?
No. I mean, if we were to do specifically kind of like their take, if you wanted to make that in a different way, whether a statue or a smaller figure, then you would obviously want to work with them. But if it's something completely new, that's all up to us. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if there were no impediments whatsoever, would there be a variant or a chase figure that you personally would love to see come into the line? No guarantees need to be given, no expectations, but if there was something some variant or chase figure you could design and get into the line, what would it be?
That's a big question.
That's a tough one. I'd like to see the movie version of Beastman
Are you gonna make
done Masters of the Universe classic style. That'd be kind of cool.
Huh. I don't know. That's a tough one.
I mean, I don't know if you've seen it all over the place, but probably Slime Pit He-Man or Horde Zombie He-Man that we have to call him for now. But I love the comic of him just coming out of the slime pit and just kind of full-on zombie mode at that point. So that's always been kind of the holy grail for variant chase figures for me.
Are you gonna make any original Snake Man figures?
Ooh. That would be cool.
Excellent question.
That's a good question.
If we get the chance to, we will.
Maybe you can design some up for us.
Yeah.
Everybody, this is the next generation of Horsemen. It's Eric Treadaway's son. And my godson, Nolan.
Are you going to design any Snake Man figures for us?
He was designing them at dinner last night. They were awesome.
Amazing.
They had alternate heads and all kinds of accessories and little minions with them.
Oh, cool.
They're super cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nolan.
Why did you become a toy maker?
Ooh, wow, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
I needed the money.
When I was a kid, I was crazy about toys. Everybody around me was like, why do you play with toys? I mean, even when I got up into my teens, we play with action figures and toys, but I love toys. And my dream was to make my own toys. I even made my own clay action figures. I took action figures that, I had, tore them apart and sculpted things onto them and put them back together. And I tried to do my own little stop motion films with those action figures, but it didn't work out very well. And later on, when I became an adult, I decided I'm going to go try to make comic books, because on the backs of toys, you see made in China, made in Japan, made in Taiwan, all that stuff. And I didn't realize that the cool stuff, the designing, the sculpting, the prototyping part of it was done here in the United States. And so I went to the Joe Kubert School to make comic books. And there I learned McFarlane Toys. I got in contact with them. I learned that all the cool stuff is done here. And from then on, I was like, I want to get into toy design. That's, I get to do what I love for a living. How could anything be better than that? And that's just it was pure dumb luck, pretty much.
I think that's what happens with everybody. I never had any intention of being in the toy business. I was actually lucky enough to meet up with some people who were in the toy business and got me in a little bit, then meet these guys who really have a huge appreciation for all this stuff, and it's been great ever since.
Yeah, I actually started out in animation and doing I considered myself an artist first because I love to draw, and then by sheer chance I ended up at Mattel. I did a He-Man piece for them. It was right when we were launching 2000X, and someone referred me to Dave Wolfram at the time to do the job. And I did it, and I said, I was in animation, and I don't know if you guys know anything about animation, but basically you're on for 6 months or so long, and then you're off, and then you're on, and you're off. And I said, hey, if anything ever comes up, let me know. If there's a full-time job. I wasn't kidding, I needed the money. I just got married and everything, and wanted to start a family and all that good stuff. And he called me up one day, and I've been there ever since, almost 17 years later.
Dave's a good guy.
Yeah. So purely by chance.
I've been an artist my whole life, and I never knew what to do with that to make it into a job and make money. And when I found out there was a school that offered a toy design program, kind of blew my mind that even existed.
Which one was that? Otis?
Otis, yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of toy design schools you can start looking into now.
Yeah, so it kind of was a cool program because you didn't have to focus on one thing. You got to learn how to sculpt and paint and draw and sell and come up with ideas, learn how to engineer stuff. So you learned about everything, and it was really kind of eye-opening to see how much cool stuff you could do with that. But what made it worth doing for so long was when I was a kid, and I had all my toys that I loved playing with, I remember all that stuff and how it influenced me and made me happy and what I decided to do later in life. And I wanted to be the person making that toy for the younger kids so that they would have that kind of memory to kind of hold on to. So that's why, I've been at Mattel for 12 plus years now, because hopefully one toy gets out there and changes some kid's life.
Yeah. Awesome. So if you're interested in toy design, there's Otis School of Toy Design here in California. And on the East Coast, there's the Fashion Institute of Technology. They have a really good toy design course there as well.
Awesome. All right, guys, we're down to the last minute, so I'm going to take one final question here. Sorry, guys.
Ultimate Gamer.
Well, it kind of has to do with the question I'm about to ask you. So, my name's Kaden, by the way. I'm just kind of nervous seeing all of you because I know you guys all think anything like that. Okay, so here's the question. When I was little, I used to, not as little, but I played a mobile He-Man game on my dad's phone, right?
That's the tap game, right?
No. Yeah. And then I'm wondering, are you thinking about teaming up with Sony or Microsoft to bring a He-Man game to PS4 or Xbox?
Ooh, that would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, to take He-Man to a whole nother level.
I would love to see that.
And the whole universe.
I've been trying to get a He-Man game, like a badass game out forever, just to push some way. One of the things I would love to see happen is maybe like right now in the comics, right? There's Injustice, the game, the fighting game, and they're pitting all kinds of heroes together. They fought the Ninja Turtles. Ninja Turtles showed up in the game. Now He-Man is fighting Injustice in the comics. I think he would be an amazing, maybe DLC character if there's an Injustice 3. I would love to see that. I keep bringing that idea up, and everyone's like, I don't know, we'll see about that. I'm like, it'd be awesome.
Masters as in MMORPGLTGMGHFB.
Yeah, I think you got that right.
One of those games, that would be awesome too.
I think it's an untapped universe in the digital gaming kind of world. I think there would be amazing games of all kinds of categories. So I think there's probably some people thinking about that.
Yeah, people have been trying to do that for a while. It's just finding the right partner and getting the right representation of the characters, you know? So it's something that even when I was on the brand, people were talking about doing.
Yeah. Sweet. It's coming. One day. It will be there.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time. Let's hear it for these guys up here. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody.